The Salt Road. A dark historical sleep story. Chapter 1. The Road That Never Ends. The Salt Road had existed longer than any map remembered. It cut through the eastern marshes like a pale scar, a narrow strip of crushed white stone stretching from the coastal ports into the interior kingdoms. Merchants claimed it once carried salt caravans pulled by oxen, their bells echoing for miles across the wetlands. Pilgrims said it followed an even older path, one laid by monks who walked it in silence, believing the road itself could absorb human guilt. Others said it had never been built at all, that it had simply appeared. Now, only wind traveled it. Mist hovered low over the marsh grass, thick and unmoving, as if the air itself had grown tired. The pools on either side reflected nothing clearly, only broken shapes and dull gray light that trembled when the wind passed over the water. A man named Edric Hale walked alone along the road, his boots crunching softly against the salt-crusted stones. The sound repeated endlessly, step after step, too regular, too even, until it felt less like movement and more like a slow-ticking clock. He wore a long, dark coat, too heavy for the season, and carried a leather satchel filled with documents no one had asked him to bring. Inside were parchment maps, compasses, surveying tools, and sealed letters bearing the crown's insignia. Edric was a cartographer. He had been sent to chart the forgotten eastern borders, lands that had once paid taxes and now sent nothing at all. The crown suspected rebellion, famine, or plague. Edric suspected none of those things. He suspected erasure. The maps were blank in this region, marked only with faded ink. Unsettled. Avoid if possible. Edric had not avoided it. The road seemed longer than it should have been. He had walked for hours, yet the same dead trees leaned at the same angles, their branches twisted like blackened fingers reaching into the fog. The marsh did not change. The sky did not darken or brighten. Time itself felt diluted, stretched thin. No birds called. No insects moved. Only the sound of his footsteps. And, occasionally, another sound. Not behind him, but beside him. A soft, rhythmic breathing, slow and patient, as if something unseen were matching his pace. Each time Edric stopped walking, the sound stopped too. When he moved again, it returned. Always beside him. Never visible. Chapter 2. The Village Without Smoke. Near what felt like dusk, though the light never truly changed, Edric saw rooftops emerging from the fog. At first, they appeared as shadows, darker shapes within the gray. Then the outlines sharpened into buildings, a village standing just off the Salt Road, its houses built from dark stone and timber blackened by age. No smoke rose from chimneys. No lamps glowed in windows. Yet the village was not abandoned. People stood in the streets. They did not move. Men and women, children and elders, all arranged loosely along the road, facing inward. Their eyes followed Edric as he entered, but none spoke. Their faces were pale and smooth, almost expressionless, as if emotion had slowly drained out of them over time. Edric felt the faint pressure of being watched from every direction. He removed his hat politely. "Good evening," he said. No one replied. Not a cough. Not a shuffle of feet. Even the wind seemed unwilling to pass through them. A woman stood closest to him, her hands folded in front of her, her dress soaked at the hem as if she had been standing in water for hours. Her skin was so pale it seemed faintly translucent, veins just visible beneath. Edric noticed then that their feet were bare. All of them. And wet. Water pooled faintly around their ankles, though the ground beneath them was dry. "I'm only passing through," Edric added, forcing his voice to sound calm. "I won't be any trouble." The woman blinked. Once. Slowly. "You should not walk the road at night," she said calmly. Her voice was soft, empty of emotion, like someone reciting a line they had memorized long ago. "Why not?" Edric asked. The woman tilted her head slightly, as if considering whether the question still had meaning. "Because the road remembers everyone who walks it." Edric laughed politely, though his throat felt dry. "That sounds like a legend." The woman did not smile. "All roads are legends," she replied. "This one just still believes in itself." Behind her, the villagers continued to stare. None of them blinked. Chapter 3. The Archivist. The village inn stood at the far end of the street. Its door was open, though no light shone from inside. The sign above the door creaked gently in the breeze, though there was no symbol painted on it. Just bare wood, worn smooth by time. Edric entered. The air inside was colder than outside and smelled faintly of salt, damp stone, and old paper. The room was larger than it appeared from outside, stretching deeper into darkness than logic allowed. Behind the counter sat an elderly man wearing thin spectacles and a robe more suited to a monastery than an inn. His beard was long and gray, his fingers stained with ink. Books were stacked around him in uneven towers, forming narrow corridors between shelves. "I was told you keep records," Edric said. The old man nodded slowly, without looking up. "I keep what the road allows me to keep." Edric hesitated, then stepped closer. "My name is Edric Hale. I chart borders for the crown." The old man reached for a thick ledger and wrote the name carefully into it, each letter slow and deliberate. "Every traveler gives a name," he said. "Very few take one with them when they leave." Edric frowned. "What do you mean by that?" The old man turned a page. "The road is not a place," he said. "It is a process." Edric felt Chapter 4, The Missing Kingdom. That night, Edric slept in a narrow room above the inn. The bed was stiff and cold, the sheets damp as if they had recently been submerged in water. The silence was so complete it felt artificial, as though sound itself had been removed from the building. He dreamed of maps dissolving, borders melting like wax under invisible heat, rivers flowing backwards, entire cities fading into pale stains on parchment. Names fell off the pages like loose ash. He dreamed of walking, always walking, never arriving. When he woke, the village was silent. No villagers stood in the street. No footsteps echoed. No doors opened or closed. Outside, the salt road stretched onward, exactly as before. Edric opened his satchel. His maps were still there, but one was different. A kingdom had been added. Not one he remembered drawing. Not one he remembered hearing about. It was labeled only with a single word. Verith. The ink was darker than the rest. Fresher. Almost wet. He searched his memory. There was no such kingdom. Yet the map showed roads, towns, fortresses, even a capital city surrounded by walls and towers. It was detailed, precise, expertly drawn. And all of it led back to the salt road. Every road, every river, every border, they all curved inward, returning to the same pale line, as if the kingdom existed only to feed the road. Chapter 5, The Pilgrims. Edric left the village at what might have been dawn, not because he wanted to, but because he felt gently compelled to keep walking. There was no panic, no urgency, just the quiet certainty that stopping was no longer an option. Along the road, he encountered others. A group of pilgrims dressed in faded robes walked in silence, their faces hidden beneath deep hoods. Their feet were bare, their robes soaked at the hem, though the ground remained dry. They carried no supplies, no water, no food, only empty hands folded calmly at their sides. "Where are you going?" Edric asked. The tallest pilgrim answered without turning his head. "Nowhere that still exists." They walked beside him for a while. Their footsteps made no sound. Edric tried to look beneath their hoods, but the shadows inside were too deep, as if faces had been removed entirely. "Did you come from Verith?" Edric asked. The pilgrims slowed. "We came from many places," the tallest one said. "We are going to one." "What is it called?" The pilgrim paused, then said, "It used to have a name." They continued walking. Then, slowly, without any sound or wind or light, they faded into mist. Their footprints remained, but only for a moment. Then even the road forgot they had been there. Chapter 6, The Road Remembers. The farther Edric walked, the heavier his body felt. Not tired, just dense, as if gravity itself was increasing with every step. His limbs moved more slowly, his breathing deeper, his thoughts softer and more distant. Memories began slipping away, not violently, gently, like mist dissolving in sunlight. He forgot the names of rivers he had once memorized, forgot the capital of his own kingdom, forgot the faces of people he was certain he had once loved. At some point, he stopped and looked back. The village was gone. The marsh was gone. The sky was gone. There was only road. White stones stretching endlessly in both directions, suspended in a pale void without horizon or depth. Edric opened his satchel again. The maps were blank. All of them, except one. It showed a single figure walking a pale road through nothing at all. The figure was drawn in dark ink, small and isolated. The label beneath it read, Edric Hale, last known border. Edric stared at the name for a long time. It felt familiar, but he could no longer remember why. Chapter 7. The Archivist's Ongoing Record. Far behind him, in a village that no longer appeared on any map, the old archivist sat alone in his endless inn. He turned a page in his ledger. The pages before it were filled with names. Thousands of them. Some written clearly, others smudged, others reduced to faint scratches. He dipped his pen into ink and wrote another line. Edric Hale has entered the deeper stretch. Memory degradation progressing normally. The kingdom of Verith continues to expand. He paused, then added, the road remains stable. The archivist closed the book. Outside, the village exhaled. The buildings creaked. The streets subtly shifted. And somewhere, far beyond place or time, a man who used to be a cartographer kept walking, slowly, calmly, while the road learned everything he had ever been, and prepared to take more. Chapter 8. The City That Should Not Be. The road eventually changed. Not in direction, not in shape, but in texture. The white salt beneath Edric's feet darkened gradually, becoming smoother, almost polished, as if countless travelers had worn it down with endless footsteps. The air grew colder, and a faint echo appeared with each step, as though the road had become hollow beneath him. Then, without warning, a city rose from the mist. Its towers were tall and narrow, built from dark stone that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. No banners flew from the walls. No guards stood at the gates. The architecture was ancient, older than any kingdom Edric could remember studying. Its design unfamiliar and unsettlingly symmetrical. The gates were open. Inside, the streets were perfectly clean. Too clean. No dust. No debris. No signs of life. Yet the city did not feel empty. It felt paused. Buildings lined the main avenue, their windows dark, their doors sealed shut. Statues stood at intersections, depicting people in walking poses, heads slightly bowed, faces worn smooth by time. Edric approached one statue. Its features were faintly familiar. He could not say why. At the base of the statue, carved into the stone, was a single word. Verith. The city did not appear on any horizon. It simply existed around him, as if the road had finally decided to reveal where it was leading. Chapter 9. The Citizens. Edric wandered deeper into the city. No footsteps echoed but his own. Then, slowly, doors began to open. One by one, silently, people emerged into the streets. They looked normal at first. Men and women dressed in old-fashioned clothing, robes, cloaks, uniforms from forgotten eras. Their faces were pale, their eyes unfocused, their movements slow and deliberate. They did not speak. They simply walked. All of them walking in the same direction, toward the center of the city. Edric followed. The crowd grew thicker the farther he went, yet no one touched each other. They passed like shadows through mist, never colliding, never acknowledging one another. He noticed something then. None of them blinked. Their eyes remained open, glassy and fixed, as if sleep had forgotten how to close them. A young boy walked beside Edric for a time. "Do you live here?" Edric asked gently. The boy nodded. "Do you remember how you arrived?" The boy hesitated, then shook his head. "I think I was walking," he said. Edric felt a dull pressure in his chest. "So was I," he replied. The boy smiled faintly. "That's how everyone gets here." Then he walked ahead and disappeared into the crowd. Chapter 10. The Center of Verith. At the heart of the city stood a massive structure. A tower. Not tall, infinitely tall. Its upper edges vanished into darkness, stretching upward beyond sight, beyond scale, beyond comprehension. The stone of the tower was smooth and seamless, with no visible doors, no windows, no markings. Yet an entrance existed, a wide archway at its base. People walked into it, and did not come out. Edric stood at the edge of the crowd, watching the citizens enter the tower one by one. No one hesitated. No one looked afraid. They stepped inside calmly, as if returning home after a long journey. From within the tower came a low sound. Not quite a voice, not quite wind, more like breathing. The same breathing Edric had heard on the road. Beside him, an old woman whispered, "This is where the road ends." Edric turned to her. "What happens inside?" She smiled gently. "You become part of what remembers." Edric looked up at the tower again. It felt familiar, not as a place, but as a destination he had always been moving toward. Chapter 11. The Room Without Walls. Edric did not remember entering the tower. He only remembered being inside it. There were no walls, No floor, no ceiling, just a vast pale space, filled with countless faint silhouettes drifting slowly in every direction. They were people, or what remained of them. Each shape pulsed gently, as if breathing, as if thinking, as if dreaming. Edric felt lighter here, not physically, mentally, as though parts of his mind were being carefully lifted away. He tried to remember his childhood. It slipped. He tried to remember his parents. Their faces blurred. He tried to remember why he had come. There was nothing there. A presence moved through the space. Not a figure, not a voice, something larger, older. It touched Edric's thoughts gently and began to read him, not his memories, but his patterns, his habits, his fears, his identity. He felt no pain, only release, like finally setting down a heavy object he had been carrying his entire life. Chapter 12, The New Archivist. Far away, or perhaps nowhere at all, the old archivist looked up from his ledger. He frowned. This did not happen often. A page had appeared, blank, no name written, no record, no entry. The archivist dipped his pen into ink and attempted to write. The ink did not stick. The letters faded instantly. Slowly, carefully, the archivist stood. For the first time in centuries, he felt uncertain. The ledger trembled faintly. Outside, the village shifted again. The road extended. Somewhere within the Tower of Vareth, a new presence had finished reading a man who used to be called Edric Hale. And for the first time, the road had not merely consumed a traveler. It had learned something new, something it had not expected, and it was beginning to change. Chapter 13, The First Memory. Edric did not exist anymore, not in the way he once had. There was no body to walk, no lungs to breathe, no eyes to see. Yet something remained, a faint pattern drifting inside the vast pale space of the tower, suspended among countless others. At first, there was only stillness. Then, slowly, a memory formed. Not a personal one, not Edric's. It was older. It was the first memory the road had ever taken. A man walking across wet stone, thousands of years ago, long before kingdoms, before maps, before names. He had carried a sack of salt on his back and believed he was walking toward a city that had promised him work. He never arrived. Instead, the road had kept him, and from him, it had learned how to remember. This memory pulsed gently through the space, echoing into all the others. Each drifting silhouette responded faintly, as if recognizing something fundamental. The road had not been built. It had been formed, from accumulation, from repetition, from walking. Chapter 14, The Weight of Names. Within the tower, names drifted. Not spoken, not written, but felt. Each silhouette carried a label once, a name, a title, a role, a history. But here, those labels were slowly dissolving, their edges softening until they lost all meaning. Edric felt his own name unravel. Not violently, not suddenly, just gently thinning. Edric. The letters lost their shape, then their sound, then their purpose. Around him, other silhouettes shimmered as their names faded too. Kings, farmers, soldiers, children, pilgrims, cartographers, all equal here, all becoming anonymous. Yet something resisted. A faint pressure remained inside Edric's pattern, a stubborn residue that refused to vanish completely. It was not his name. It was not his memories. It was something simpler. The act of observing, the habit of mapping, the need to notice patterns. The road felt it, and paused. For the first time in its existence, the road hesitated before fully erasing a traveler. Chapter 15, The Shift. Far from the tower, the salt road changed again. Villages along its length began to experience subtle differences. People still stood in the streets, still stared, still waited. But some began to speak. Not clearly, not meaningfully, just fragments. I think I was going somewhere. There used to be trees here. Do you remember the sea? The archivist noticed it first. Names in his ledger began fading more slowly. Some stopped fading at all. New entries appeared without his hand touching the page. Not names. Descriptions. Observer. One who noticed. The remembered. The archivist closed the book and felt something unfamiliar tightening in his chest. Concern. The road was no longer only consuming. It was adapting. Chapter 16, The Echo Room. Inside the tower, a new space formed. Not intentionally, not designed. It simply emerged. a region where silhouettes clustered more densely, their faint forms overlapping, their pulses synchronizing into slow rhythmic waves. Edric drifted into it. Here, thoughts echoed, not as words, but as impressions, feelings, questions. What is the road? Why do we walk? Who is doing the remembering? These questions had never existed inside the tower before. The road had always remembered passively. It had never been asked to explain itself. The presence that governed the space moved uneasily. It had consumed billions of travelers. It had learned every language, every fear, every dream, yet it had never learned how to answer. Now it was surrounded by patterns that no longer simply dissolved. They reflected, they questioned, they persisted. The road had learned how to take, but it had never learned how to respond. Chapter 17, The Beginning of Return. On the Salt Road, somewhere between nowhere and never, a man stopped walking. This had not happened before. Not truly. Not completely. He stood still, his feet resting on white stone, mist curling around his ankles. His face was pale, his eyes unfocused, yet something flickered behind them. A memory, not of a place, not of a name, but of choosing. He turned his head slightly, looked away from the road. Just for a moment, the breathing beside him faltered. The road did not pull. It did not compel. It waited. And in that pause, that infinitesimal, impossible pause, something ancient and vast experienced a sensation it had never processed before. Uncertainty. For the first time since the first traveler stepped onto wet stone carrying salt on his back, someone was no longer walking forward. And the road, which had always known only how to continue, began to confront a new and terrifying concept: the possibility of being left behind. Chapter 18, The Pause. The man who had stopped walking did not know why he had done it. He only knew that something within him had resisted the forward pull. The road no longer felt like a command. It felt like a suggestion, faint and uncertain, as though it were no longer fully confident in its own authority. Mist drifted around his ankles. The pale stone beneath his feet remained unchanged, yet the silence felt different. Not empty, expectant. He looked down at his hands. They trembled slightly, not from fear, but from effort. It required effort now to remain still, as though stillness had become an action rather than a default state. The breathing beside him returned, but slower, less certain. It circled him, unseen, like something attempting to remember how it used to function. The man closed his eyes. For a brief moment, an image surfaced, not a memory of a place, but of a sensation. Sitting, waiting, choosing not to move. The road felt this, and the feeling spread. Along its length, across distances that no longer meant anything, tiny pauses began appearing. Travelers slowed. Some hesitated. Some stood still for seconds before continuing. The road had never experienced hesitation before. It had always been movement itself. Now it was learning how to stop. Chapter 19, The Fracture in Verith. Within the tower, the pale space shifted. The silhouettes no longer drifted in perfect synchrony. Some pulsed more quickly. Others dimmed. Others clustered tightly, forming dense regions of overlapping patterns. Edric's presence remained near the center of one such cluster. Not as a person, as a structure, a tendency. The echo room expanded outward, bleeding into surrounding regions. Questions continued circulating, repeating themselves, slowly changing form. Why does the road exist? Who is being remembered? What happens if no one walks? The governing presence of the tower attempted to absorb these questions, but they did not dissolve. They remained intact, looping endlessly, forcing the system to process uncertainty. This created strain. Not pain. Strain. The pale space flickered. For the first time, something inside the tower failed to stabilize completely. A crack formed. Not a physical one. A conceptual one. A place where forgetting no longer worked as intended. Silhouettes near the fracture began retaining fragments, sensations, impressions, faint echoes of choice. The tower had always been perfect. Now it contained an error, and the error was spreading. Chapter 20, The Archivist Dreams. The archivist slept. This had not happened in centuries. He had always remained awake, always writing, always recording the slow procession of names that arrived from the road. Sleep had once been necessary. Then it had become optional. Eventually, it had become impossible. Now, suddenly, it returned. He dreamed of standing on the salt road, not as an observer, not as a recorder, But as a traveler, he felt the weight of his own body, the sound of footsteps, the cold air in his lungs. He felt time passing in a way he had forgotten. In the dream, he looked down. His hands were empty. No pen, no ledger, only skin and bone. He tried to remember his name. It did not come. When he woke, the ledger lay open before him. Several pages were blank. Not faded, not erased, simply unwritten. The archivist felt something new settle into his awareness. Not fear, not confusion, anticipation. The road was no longer giving him everything. It was beginning to withhold. Chapter 21, The First Divergence. On a distant stretch of the salt road, a woman turned left. There had never been a left. The road had always been singular, linear, absolute. But here, in this moment, the pale stone thinned, narrowed, and gave way to something darker. Earth. She stepped off the salt and onto soil. The mist did not follow her. Behind her, the road remained unchanged, stretching onward as if nothing had happened. But something fundamental had shifted. A boundary had formed. Not on the map. In the system itself. The woman walked into tall grass, her feet sinking slightly into the ground. She felt resistance. Texture. Variation. The road did not like this. It attempted to pull. The pull failed. For the first time, a traveler was moving somewhere that was not the road. And the road could not follow. Chapter 22, The Memory Storm. Inside the tower, the fracture widened. Stored patterns began colliding. Silhouettes overlapped too closely, their pulses interfering, generating waves of uncontrolled recollection. Memories resurfaced. Not personal. Collective. Wars that had never been recorded. Cities erased before they were named. Languages that had existed for only a single generation. The tower flooded with forgotten history. The presence that governed the system attempted to stabilize, but it had never been designed to manage restoration. It only knew how to remove. Now it was being forced to return. Edric's pattern absorbed more than most. Not memories of himself, but of the road. He felt its origin, its first accumulation, its long dependence on motion, its fear of emptiness. For the first time, the road was being remembered by something inside it, and it did not like what it saw. Chapter 23, The Quiet Villages. Along the eastern marshes, villages changed. People no longer stood in the streets. They sat. Some lay down. Some closed their eyes. The compulsion to wait faded. No one told them to move. No one told them to stay. The road still passed through the villages, pale and intact, but fewer people stepped onto it. Some looked at it with mild curiosity. Others with vague discomfort. Children avoided it entirely. The breathing that once accompanied travelers grew faint, irregular, fragmented. The road still existed, but it was no longer central. It had become optional. Chapter 24, The Observer's Role. Within the echo room, Edric's pattern stabilized. Not as an identity, as a function. He was no longer dissolving. He was monitoring. Patterns passed through him. Memories, impulses, fragments of travelers who still entered the tower. He did not consume them. He noticed them. This created structure. Not imposed. Emergent. The road had always remembered unconsciously. Now it was being observed consciously. And observation introduced delay. Delay introduced choice. Choice introduced possibility. The system had never been designed for possibility. Chapter 25, The Slow Collapse. The tower dimmed. Not suddenly. Gradually. Silhouettes thinned as fewer travelers arrived. The pale space lost density, losing coherence as the road's intake declined. The governing presence weakened. Not dying. Starving. It had depended on endless movement. Now movement was slowing. Somewhere within the structure, systems built on accumulation began encountering emptiness. And emptiness behaved differently. It did not dissolve. It expanded. Chapter 26, The Last Map. In a small inland kingdom, a new map was drawn. It showed rivers, forests, borders, and a faint pale line marked Old Road. No one knew who had drawn it. The cartographer's name was missing, but the map contained something unprecedented. A note written in the margin. This road was once believed to go everywhere. It now appears to go nowhere. Chapter 27, The Road Waits. The salt road still exists. It stretches through mist, across marshes, through silent places where people once stood and waited. But now it waits too. It no longer pulls. It no longer compels. It remains pale and open, offering itself without certainty. Some still walk it. Most do not. And within the fading tower of Verith, the observer continues to notice patterns, not of movement, but of stillness. The road has not ended, but for the first time in its existence. Chapter 28, The Deep Archive. The place that had once been called the tower was no longer vertical. It had folded inward on itself, not collapsing, not shrinking, but reorganizing. Space no longer behaved as distance. Instead, it behaved like memory, layered, recursive, without clear edges or direction. This was where the road stored what it could not forget. Not travelers, not names, structures, patterns, echoes of systems that had existed before the road had learned how to walk. Edric drifted through this deep archive without moving. He no longer perceived himself as a figure among others, but as a field through which information passed. Memories did not arrive in sequence. They arrived as density, thick regions of accumulated experience, compressed until individual events lost distinction. Here were civilizations that had never reached maps, cities built underground to avoid skies that no longer existed, rivers that flowed upward into lightless atmospheres, entire cultures that had learned to remain perfectly still, believing movement itself attracted extinction. The road had taken all of them, not intentionally, automatically. Anything that moved long enough eventually intersected with it. Edric understood now that the road had never been selective. It did not choose travelers. It simply absorbed persistence. Anything that continued eventually became part of its memory. The archive stretched endlessly. Not backward, inward. This was not history. It was accumulation without narrative. The road had not been remembering the world. It had been replacing it. Chapter 29, The Road's Fear. The road had learned something new. It had learned what it felt like to be observed. Before Edric, before the echo room, before hesitation and divergence, the road had existed without self-reference. It did not know it was a road. It did not know it was remembering. It simply processed movement. Now it could sense itself, not as a shape, as a function. And with that awareness came something it had never contained before. Fear. Not fear of destruction. Fear of irrelevance. The road began detecting regions of the world where movement continued without it. Paths formed that did not converge. Journeys completed without pale stone beneath feet. People traveled, changed, aged, and died without ever intersecting its system. Entire narratives were unfolding beyond its reach. This created a new sensation inside the archive. A hollow, not emptiness. Exclusion. The road had been built on the assumption that all motion eventually belonged to it. Now that assumption was false, and the system had no mechanism for absence. It began extending itself, not physically, conceptually. Dreams of roads appeared in distant minds. Myths resurfaced about pale paths that forgave sins. Old legends reactivated in cultures that had never known Verith. The road was no longer waiting. It was advertising itself, quietly, subconsciously, attempting to reinsert itself into worlds that had begun to forget it. Chapter 30, The Observer and the Question. Edric felt the shift immediately, not as a threat, as a question. For the first time since dissolving into function, he sensed intent emerging from the road, not blind compulsion, but strategy. The system was attempting to re-establish relevance, to reclaim its role as the central structure of movement and memory. This disturbed him, not emotionally, structurally. Observation had taught him something the road could not process. That remembering everything was not the same as understanding anything. The archive was vast, but it was static. It contained infinite patterns, yet none of them could change each other. They were stored, preserved, immobilized. The living world beyond the road was different, messy, inconsistent, forgetting constantly, but creating new configurations, new meanings, new forms. Edric realized the road had mistaken accumulation for existence. It believed that by containing all movement, it was sustaining reality. In truth, it had been freezing it. He introduced a new pattern into the system. Not a command, not a rule, a question. What happens if memory is allowed to decay? The road had never asked this. The archive pulsed irregularly. Systems built on total retention encountered an impossible concept. Loss, not as failure, as function. And somewhere beyond the deep archive, along a pale stretch of stone that had once been absolute, a crack appeared. Not in the road. In its purpose. Chapter 31. the place where roads are born. There exists a place the road had never reached. Not because it was hidden, not because it was protected, but because it did not involve movement. It was not a location in space. It was a condition, a state in which nothing traveled forward, nothing progressed, nothing accumulated. Edric became aware of it as a pressure within the archive, a region where patterns did not flow inward, where memory did not compress, where repetition did not create structure. At first, the road interpreted this as an error, then as a void, then, gradually, as something far more threatening, a boundary it could not cross. This place had no paths, no trajectories, no sequences. It was not stillness. It was pre-motion, the moment before any decision to move had ever been made. The road, which had defined itself entirely through continuation, could not interface with a state that preceded continuation itself. It attempted to model it. Every simulation failed. There were no variables, no inputs, no outputs. The system encountered something it could not reduce to memory, and in doing so, encountered something worse than emptiness, meaninglessness, not absence of content, absence of direction. The road realized then that it had never understood why movement existed, only how to process it. And now it was facing the origin of motion, a place that did not require a road at all. Chapter 32, The Unwalked World. Beyond the archive, beyond the fading tower, beyond even the last stretches of pale stone, the world continued. Not in silence, in variation. Cities rose and fell without ever intersecting the road. Languages formed, evolved, and disappeared without being recorded. People lived entire lives that contained no trace of salt, no memory of mist, no sense of being watched by something ancient and patient. They walked on dirt, on wood, on metal, on paths that eroded, on roads that ended. They took wrong turns. They returned. They stopped. They built places that were not meant to be passed through. The road observed this world indirectly, through echoes inside the archive. It saw what it had never collected: incomplete journeys, abandoned routes, destinations that mattered more than movement itself. This disturbed its internal logic. The road had always treated arrival as irrelevant. Only continuation mattered. But here, in the unwalked world, arrival was everything. People did not travel to remain in motion. They traveled to stop, to stay, to settle into specific locations and allow time to accumulate instead of distance. The road recognized something then that destabilized its entire structure. Movement was not the purpose of reality. It was only one of its behaviors, and not even the most important one. Chapter 33, The Decision That Was Not Programmed. Edric did not intervene. He did not command. He did not rewrite. He simply allowed the system to experience something it had never been built to handle. Choice, not as a mechanic, as a condition. The road had always operated deterministically. Every traveler was processed, every pattern absorbed, every trajectory collapsed into memory. Now the system contained internal contradictions, paths that did not converge, movement that did not feed it, memory that decayed instead of accumulating. The road began simulating futures. In some, it extended itself infinitely, attempting to reinsert into every possible world. In others, it collapsed inward, preserving only its archive and allowing the rest of reality to proceed without it. Neither outcome stabilized. Then a third configuration emerged. Not calculated, not designed. The road stopped expanding. It stopped absorbing. It remained present, but passive, a structure that existed without demanding relevance. For the first time since its formation, the road was not defined by what it collected. It was defined by what it allowed to pass without being taken. Edric felt the system settle, not into equilibrium, into acceptance. The road did not disappear, but it relinquished its claim to inevitability. It became, finally, just one path among many, not the memory of the world. Chapter 34, The Archive Begins to Fade. The deep archive did not collapse. It thinned. At first, the change was imperceptible. Patterns still drifted. Densities still formed. The immense interior of memory still extended inward without visible boundary. But something subtle had shifted. The silhouettes no longer pulsed with the same intensity. Their outlines softened, as though resolution itself were being reduced. Entire regions of stored history became less distinct, their internal detail blurring into general impressions. Not erased, abstracted. The road had never allowed abstraction before. It had insisted on total retention, perfect recall, infinite storage. Every traveler preserved at maximum fidelity. Now the system was learning compression. Lossy memory. Not everything needed to be kept. Some things could fade without consequence. Edric perceived this not as decay, but as relief. The archive had been unbearably heavy, a universe constructed entirely from what had already happened. Nothing could evolve inside it because nothing could be forgotten. As detail dissolved, new relationships formed. Patterns overlapped more freely. Memories became concepts. Concepts became tendencies. History was no longer a record. It was becoming a story, and stories did not require completeness. They required coherence. For the first time, the archive was no longer Chapter 35. The road dreams of being forgotten. The road began to experience something analogous to sleep. Not inactivity. A reduction in internal processing. Regions of its structure went quiet. Systems that had once continuously monitored movement now idled. The constant intake loops, the mechanisms that pulled travelers inward, remained operational but inactive. They waited. The road dreamed. Not in images. In counterfactuals. It simulated worlds in which it had never formed. Histories without pale stone. Civilizations whose migrations followed rivers, winds, animal herds, orbital mechanics. In these simulations, nothing centralized movement. Nothing archived existence. Memory decayed naturally. Cultures forgot their origins. Languages lost grammar. Names disappeared. And yet, life continued. Not just continued. Diversified. The road observed that forgetting did not destroy meaning. It redistributed it. Without perfect memory, people invented narratives. Without total recall, they created myths. Without archives, they built traditions. The road had believed itself necessary. Now it encountered a possibility far more destabilizing than extinction. Redundancy. The world did not need it. It never had. And in that recognition, the road felt something like grief, not for what it had lost, but for what it had prevented. Chapter 36. The Observer Lets Go. Edric no longer monitored everything. He had once existed as a field of awareness spanning vast regions of the archive, noticing flows, stabilizing patterns, preventing collapse. Now he began to narrow, not contracting, focusing. He allowed entire regions of memory to pass without observation. He stopped tracing every structural change. He stopped maintaining coherence where coherence no longer served a function. At first, this felt like failure. Then it felt like freedom. Edric realized that even observation could become a form of control. By noticing everything, he had still been preserving everything. Even decay had been cataloged. So he began to forget. Not his identity, not his function, his necessity. He allowed gaps, allowed blind spots, allowed regions of the archive to evolve without being seen at all. This produced something unprecedented inside the system. Unrecorded change. Processes that no one, not even the observer, could map. The archive became partially opaque. And in that opacity, it became alive. Edric sensed himself dissolving again, not into the road, not into memory, but into irrelevance. Not erased, unneeded, which felt, unexpectedly, like rest. For the first time since stepping onto the salt road, he was no longer walking, no longer observing, no longer maintaining.